Thank
I
you.
think you probably win the award for coming the farthest. If not, I think you have. But I have a little piece to read here about the presentation that I think will help you, and I'll go back quickly. For the full presentation, in this part of the competition, you're taking a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. So you will tell us what our roles are as well as what yours is. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before we begin. You'll have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you finish, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. In the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character, so we will stay in our roles through the Q&A. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role playing. Some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical, philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part will also be considered a major mistake, although you may use notes. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. Very quickly, I'll introduce myself and have the other judges introduce themselves. My name is Stanley Boss. I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. I'm a retired ethics officer from Horizon, and I failed at retirement. I'm back to work for the state and local government as Commissioner of Occupation Professional Licensing and Commissioner of Water and Sewer Authority. I've been doing this for about 20 years now.
Well,
So my name is Ruth Kraft. I'm a retired New York State Supreme Court Justice, and I now am chair of the employment law group at a New York law firm called Bartlett McDonough. I've been at this for 15 years.
I'm John Stupar. I teach at the University of California, Irvine, engineering ethics, and I'm retired from the aerospace industry. Used aircraft is where I retired from, actually, after 25 years of very high research and development. I'm also an adjunct professor here at Loyola in the graduate program. I think this is my, 16th, 18th, whenever Tom started the program. I've been doing it ever since he started it every year. So I try to get out for at least 1 or 2. I was here, what was it, a week ago when we did it at Loyola. And I absolutely enjoy observing students like you. And first of all, I want to compliment you for being so great as to come up with an idea and to put it all together and to come as far as you have to be here and present. So I wish you good luck.
thank you kindly. Thank you very much. Would you like us to introduce?
When you're ready, you can start. Introduce yourself and start your clock, and I'll start mine.
So for this presentation today, you are going to be the board of Pfizer and and we are the consulting firm Phoenix Consulting, who have been tasked with the duty of looking at corrections that we can implement within Pfizer. So, thank you, the board of Pfizer, for joining us today for our review of Pfizer's ethical practices. I'm Adeline Gabriel, project leader, and joining me in this presentation today are Hugh Sterling and Manning Clifford. As representatives of Phoenix Consulting, we are assured that our recommendations will improve the outcome of Pfizer in terms of its ethical practices, its financial viability, and its legal standing.
So when reviewing Pfizer's ethical practices as one of the leading pharmaceutical providers in the world, we kept returning to one key question. Is Pfizer's current use of capital the fairest and most sustainable approach for all of its key stakeholders? To answer this question, we'd like you to focus on 2 key areas of Pfizer's expenditure, that of share purchasing and that of research and development investment. Share purchasing involves a company using its own liquidity to repurchase its own shares on the open market, thus reducing the amount of shares outstanding. What this does is that it drives up the share price by artificially increasing demand and reducing supply. And it's through this raised share price that wealth is returned to the shareholder. In contrast, research and development is essential for Pfizer. It creates new products which drive profits for shareholders, while also providing life-saving medications and treatments for millions of consumers around the world. We think that it's relatively uncontentious from an ethical and a financial perspective that Pfizer should focus on this area of research and development investment over share purchasing when it is presented with a choice between the two. And we think it's relevant to see how these two areas of expenditure interact and react with each other. In 2010, Pfizer spent $1 billion on share purchasing. 3 years later, that figure skyrocketed to over $16 billion being spent each year on share purchasing. This suggests that significant amounts of capital was available within the company, so much so that over $16 billion could be returned to the shareholders. At the same time, Pfizer cut its research and development budget from $9 billion in 2010 to $6 billion in 2013. In a sense, what this means is that the research and development budget was sacrificed in order to enable short-term financial returns to the shareholders. For every dollar cut from research and development, there are fewer products that make it to market. Not only does this cause Pfizer's drug portfolio to stagnate, but it also deprives millions of consumers of the life-saving medications for which Pfizer is tasked with creating. We believe that this heavy focus on short-term financial returns at the expense of the consumer serves only to further compound the already greedy reputation of big pharmaceutical companies. We believe that as a company, Pfizer must reflect upon whether this strategy is viable into the future.
At Phoenix Consulting, from a secular ethical standpoint, we believe that a combined approach of both consequentialist ethics and a principle-based ethics is most conducive to the best outcomes for Pfizer. The reason that we've chosen to combine these two approaches is to appeal to a wider range of perspectives on morality. When interrogating this framework, we firstly analysed the situation that Pfizer is currently facing, then recommended a series of structural changes to the way that Pfizer conducts its business, and finally, we've looked at a portfolio of investment options that Pfizer may look into for future. We believe that Pfizer has three primary ethical obligations which are paramount to its operations. Firstly, Pfizer has an obligation to the shareholders as the owners of the business to do that which is in their best interest. That is, to deliver consistent long-term returns on their investment. Secondly, but no less importantly, as a pharmaceutical company, Pfizer has a unique obligation to its consumers as its products have the capacity to greatly improve their quality of life and also save their lives. Pfizer recognises this purpose as illustrated on the PowerPoint. Finally, as a pharmaceutical company and one of the few that have enough capital to afford the research and development costs required to bring a new drug to market, Pfizer has an obligation to society to bring the innovation of researchers to fruition and by doing so promote global health outcomes. From a consequentialist perspective, we believe that the outcomes of profit and of healthcare of individual patients and global healthcare represents an overwhelmingly positive consequentialist outcome for Pfizer. Alternatively, from our principle-based approach, we believe that Pfizer as a pharmaceutical company has a perfect duty to prioritise the production of pharmaceutical goods. Basically, for Pfizer to maintain its ethical integrity, we believe that it needs to prioritise production of pharmaceuticals that will drive long-term operation for shareholders and also drive health improvements for individuals and for society. I'll now pass over to Maddie to explain the nuances of Pfizer's current situation.
Put shortly, we believe that the problem which Pfizer is facing at the moment is that they are overutilising share repurchases and that this is coming at the expense of productive research and development opportunities. And one key adverse consequence of this, in addition to the profits which it is foregoing as a result of this, is that it is harming the consumers who would have benefited from the life-changing drugs which would be produced by this research and development spending. As she was already mentioned, share repurchases are a program where companies go onto the open market and purchase their own shares. When they have purchased them, they cancel out their existence, which reduces the number of shares outstanding. As a result of both reducing the supply of shares on the open market, while also increasing demand for these shares, it drives up the share price artificially and therefore delivers results to shareholders by delivering them an increased share price. Because of the capacity of this practice to show a company's share price as performing better than it otherwise would have had this program not taken place, there is significant concern regarding the ethics of this practice. However, we do recognise that they have some value. We believe that share repurchases should only be used in two situations where both criteria are being met. Firstly, we think that they should be a last option when seasonal amounts of money mean that the capital within the company is unable to be distributed at the end of the financial year through dividends. And secondly, we believe, and this is in addition to dividends, that the money should only be returned to shareholders where there is no capacity to spend it in a productive way to drive profits and new products into the future. We also think that share repurchasing programs, to the extent that Pfizer is currently utilizing them, is harming the value of Pfizer as a company. Market capitalization is one way of reviewing the market's view of a company's worth. It is calculated by summing the value of all shares across the number of shares, and therefore, when the share price increases, the reduction in shares means that it is not impacted by share repurchasing programs. When we looked at Pfizer's market capitalization, we saw that there was significant cause for concern. Within the past 3 years, we can see that the share price has risen consistently, while the market capitalization on these specific points has decreased. And while it is true, obviously, that share prices and market capitalizations of values would fluctuate over time, we think that the trend that a share price would be able to increase while the inherent value of that company decreases signifies a significant concern. The only mathematical explanation as to why this could occur is that share repurchase programs have reduced the number of shares outstanding on the market, and we recognize that certain incentives may be causing this practice to occur. Executive incentives, which focus predominantly on share price as a delivery of performance-based pay and bonuses, incentivizes the board of Pfizer, incentivizes the executive of Pfizer, rather, to opt for share repurchasing programs over other ways of returning money to shareholders, but also over research and development opportunities. Pragmatically, though, we think that this is having significant consequences for Pfizer's worth as a company. As we can see, research and development has been sacrificed in years where share repurchases have occurred. While each axis is scaled, when Pfizer has increased its share repurchases, it has decreased its spending on research and development, and we think that this poses a significant concern for the company. Companies need to get cash from somewhere in order to facilitate share repurchasing programs, because they are significantly expensive, as Hugh has already outlined. Pfizer, in this instance, has cut from research and development in specific instances in order to fund these programs. The consequences of this can already be seen. Pfizer has significantly cut its workforce, as we can see on the PowerPoint. In 2011, the workforce was 104,000 people. However, this has decreased to 79,000 people in 2015. Most of these cuts have been in areas of research and development, specifically related to Pfizer's use of research regarding cancer treatment. But importantly, it is also foregoing future investment opportunities which could be utilized. We do acknowledge at Phoenix Consulting that as companies get older, it is expected that they return more money to shareholders. Maturity hypothesis says that companies run out of productive investment opportunities as they've exploited more and more markets. However, as we will show later on, we believe that there are a whole host of investment portfolios which have positive expected values in current terms, which Pfizer are currently ignoring. We believe that Pfizer should be embarking on these investment programs in order to ensure that their strengths are pushed forward for its shareholders, as well as its consumers and broader health outcomes into the long run by delivering products which improve their lives while also delivering returns to its shareholders. And in this context, we believe that the trade-off is inappropriate in terms of ethical, legal, and financial frameworks.
Legally, share repurchases are far from perfect. Indeed, the practice of a company repurchasing its own shares on the open market was actually classified as market manipulation until 1982. Although the SEC has admitted that they are not actively monitoring this practice, Pfizer still faces significant retrospective risk of prosecution, leaving open the possibility of being sued for market manipulation by traders into the future. This risk has materialized numerous times in the last few years. Last year, LPL, a financial holdings company, was sued for market manipulation in a class action. The company was liable to pay $150 million in awards. In this instance, LPL was spending just over $250 million on its share repurchasing plan. Compare this with the $16 billion that Pfizer spent on its repurchasing plan in 2013. The sheer scale of Pfizer's program really reveals the enormous financial and legal risk of this practice. We think the overutilization of share repurchases increases the risk of Pfizer contravening the legislation and exposes it to significant legal risk. There has also been a powerful trajectory of change that may influence the laws surrounding this area. In the past 3 years, there has been a growing political movement against share buybacks. Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and key senators such as Elizabeth Warren have all spoken out against the practice. Interestingly, on the other side of politics, key advisors for Donald Trump, such as Larry Fink, have also expressed their desire to reduce the prevalence of this practice on the market. By reforming their practices before these potential changes to legislation are made, Pfizer stands to gain advantages over our competitors, not only in terms of new investment opportunities, but also in terms of stability. Further to this, Pfizer also stands to insulate themselves legally from potential future lawsuits. Thus, for this change to be made, proactivity is essential.
We believe that the political factors, if they are ignored, could have catastrophic impacts for Pfizer, especially given their currently misbalanced financial situation with regards to share repurchases. Pfizer has been identified continuously within the financial world as one of the most prolific utilizers of share repurchasing programs. Compared to the next largest user within the pharmaceutical industry, Pfizer, as the largest user of share repurchases within this industry, are using over 20% more of their profits on share repurchases. We believe that one just needs to look at the outputs of Pfizer in order to recognize the consequences that this is having at the moment, while also opening Pfizer's eyes to the consequences that this could have in the long run. Pfizer's last profitable internally developed drug, which contributes significantly to revenue, was developed in 2005, over a decade ago. And Pfizer has seen a drop in profits as a result of a reduction in revenue because of this. In 2011, Pfizer was making $52 billion in profits. However, as of last year, this has dropped significantly to $40 billion. While the share price has seen an increase, it necessarily is sacrificing the long-run interests of shareholders, and we believe that this is cause for significant concern with regards to the obligation which Pfizer owes to its shareholders, all shareholders, not just those who sell their shares at the higher price. If the legal consequences, which Hugh has already talked about, have the capacity to be enacted, that could pose a significant risk for Pfizer. With significant fines, potentially larger than those faced by TCL, we believe that this would have a large impact on Pfizer's financial situation. Pfizer is also currently particularly vulnerable financially. They are facing a patent cliff, with many of its profitable drugs losing patents or being open to competition from other competitors over the long run. Viagra, in the end of this year, one of its most profitable drugs, is facing rivalry from Teva's generic drug, while Lyrica and Chantix are also facing competition over the next few years. As you can see, in the next 3 years, all of these drugs are facing competition from other competitors, and this could have catastrophic implications for Pfizer's revenue as they are open to more competition. Pfizer is also currently relying significantly on public research in order to facilitate its research and development, and noting the current political context, this could also raise alarm bells for Pfizer's long-term viability. Donald Trump has signaled his intention in the recent budget to make over $5.8 billion in cuts to the NIH, a public research body with regards to pharmaceutical. And given that Pfizer utilizes this public research significantly in order to develop drugs, we think that it is imperative that Pfizer acts now in order to get ahead of the curve and ensure that its research and development pipeline continues well into the future.
These financial factors have a significant impact on the ethics of Pfizer's operations. We believe that Pfizer is currently compromising its ethical obligation to shareholders with a financial structure that is oriented towards the short term. By reducing profits, as it currently is, Pfizer is minimizing its payable dividends it can return to shareholders. Furthermore, although shareholders are benefiting in the short term from artificial inflation of share price, this is primarily speculative investors who gain by selling their shares at a higher price. Meanwhile, long-term investors who gain through dividends and selling their shares after long-term investment in Pfizer are being fatally neglected. We believe that in the same way that current shareholders benefit from investments made in the past, future shareholders of Pfizer should benefit from the investments that we make now. We also believe that Pfizer is currently compromising its ethical obligation to consumers and society more broadly. By directing expenditure away from research and development, we think that millions of customers are currently missing out on potentially life-saving drugs. Furthermore, Pfizer's seeming reluctance to fund innovation means that current consumers of Pfizer's products are losing out due to unnecessarily high drug costs. Basically, we believe that Pfizer's overutilization of share repurchases is coming at the expense of its ethical integrity.
We at Phoenix Consulting have devised a two-phase strategy that we believe will empower Pfizer to deliver ethical, legal and financially advantageous outcomes for all stakeholders. The first phase of our plan involves the implementation of structural changes that will incentivize the diversion of capital away from share repurchases. The second phase will utilise this diverted capital to expand Pfizer's research and development program, which we believe will yield profitable medical outcomes for millions of consumers and shareholders alike. The first phase can be broken down into two central initiatives. Firstly, we recommend restructuring executive incentives. Currently, Pfizer's executive compensation incentives are very much linked to the value of the share. Further to this, most of Pfizer's executives are actually being primarily paid in shares rather than in cash. We believe that this creates a misaligned incentive in which Pfizer's executives may prioritise or perhaps manipulate the value of the share through practices such as share purchasing. In order to remedy these skewed incentives, we propose that Pfizer restructures its executive compensation scheme towards more of a focus on market capitalisation rather than on the share price. We believe that this figure of market capitalisation provides a more accurate reflection of the company's prosperity, while also having the added benefit of being immune from manipulation. We also propose the implementation of a more cash and reward-based compensation scheme, which we believe will align executives' interests with the long-term prosperity of the company. Now, in saying this, we're not questioning how much Pfizer's executives are being paid, rather how and why they're being compensated as such. We propose more transparency in effect. Phase one also involves the incentivization of long-term interest among shareholders. Currently, executives are inclined to pursue short-term interests in order to deliver immediate financial returns to investors. Consequently, there is little to no reason for many shareholders to remain loyal to Pfizer in the long term. In order to remedy this, we propose a deliberate trickle-down cultural focus on long-termism from management. Now, this will take the form of a more thorough and open communication about the future of the company and potential investment strategies. We believe that in knowing the future sort of strategy of Pfizer, shareholders will be more inclined to pivot to a long-term investment strategy. We also propose the implementation of tenure voting. Tenure voting is a common practice in the business world, and it essentially gives shareholders who have held their shares for more than 5 years increased voting rights. Numerous studies have demonstrated the viability of this approach. Indeed, over the past 45 years, those companies using tenure voting have yielded over 6 times the returns to investors than a market index. Ultimately, we believe that these two initiatives of A, restructuring executive compensation schemes, and B, creating a culture of long-termism, will allow Pfizer to redirect capital towards research and development and away from share purchasing. This diverted capital can then be used to create profitable medical outcomes for all of Pfizer's long-term stakeholders, as well as millions of consumers around the world. I'll now pass back to Adelaide.
Thank you. By restructuring corporate incentives and creating a culture of long-termism, we foresee Pfizer realigning its investment priorities and, in doing so, redirecting expenditure away from share repurchases and freeing up the capital required to make long-term minded constructive investments. With sustainable profit as well as health outcomes in mind, we've compiled a portfolio of investments that Pfizer may choose to look into their future. To clarify, we don't believe that Pfizer should entirely suspend all use of share repurchases. Rather, we intend to disincentivize the use in preference of more long-term minded investment. Furthermore, we're not just advising that Pfizer continue to pump money blindly into research and development. Rather, we've identified 3 fields which have the opportunity to transform Pfizer's pharmaceutical development in general. These 3 fields have been chosen for their proven feasibility, their statistically supported profitability, and their ethicality. The first of these fields is that of drug design in general. We believe that the current US political climate brings about an optimal context for research and development investment. With President Trump's appointment of Dr. Scott Bleibel as head of the FDA, we think that progressive drug approval will be soon to follow. Progressive drug approval streamlines the whole pharmaceutical development process by doing away with phase 1 and 2 of clinical trials. This makes it faster and less expensive for companies like Pfizer to bring drugs onto the market. Furthermore, as Manning has previously mentioned, Pfizer is faced with the urgent need to bolster its product pipeline. It's currently been on slow with a series of patent expiries, with many more to come. Furthermore, its current product pipeline is significantly weaker than that of other competitors. Even Roche, which is not one of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies, has a product pipeline which is stronger than that of Pfizer. Many of the drugs on Pfizer's product pipeline are facing competition for exclusivity on the market as well. With free capital, as well as the political environment and the urgent need to bolster their pipeline in mind, we think that Pfizer should invest in medical fields that they have currently overlooked. One such medical field is that of the regenerative medical market. This is an extremely profitable field which has already registered a compound annual growth rate of 19% over the last 5 years. The regenerative medical market has the capacity to meet the needs of a broad patient base, including the exponentially growing aged care market. So, from a consequentialist approach, Pfizer is able to reap enormous amounts of profit from tapping into this market, whilst also producing health benefits for all of these patients involved. Other pharmaceutical companies have already looked into research in this field. For example, Google has just spent $1.5 billion on the California Life Sciences Institute, which is specifically for regenerative medical use. Another field of investment that we think that Pfizer should tap into is that of the promotion of innovative research. We think that this is able to streamline the development of pharmaceuticals for the future, which will make it more profitable and easier for Pfizer to produce new molecular entities, that is, new drugs, onto the market each year. One model field of this is that of genomics, which is the mapping of genomes, which allows product design personalized for specific populations based on their genomes. For Pfizer as a company, this will make research and development more efficient by making it easy to identify the cause of disease, also requiring less trials and therefore being cheaper as an overall. For consumers, this will make products more affordable and also safer, having less side effects. So with more output of drugs and safer and more affordable products, we're seeing that Pfizer is fulfilling its obligation to stakeholders in this way. Third and finally, we think that Pfizer should embark on investment into emerging economies. These economies, including that of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are expected to drive significant amounts of growth in pharmaceutical sales in coming years. In 2018 alone, these 5 countries are predicted to drive 50% of pharmaceutical growth in sales, compared to just 3% in developed markets. We want Pfizer to follow the example of competitors and create partnerships of already existing medical institutions in these countries to best tailor their business portfolio to the needs of the populations. For Pfizer, this is an opportunity to tap into previously unexplored markets, and for the populations of these countries, this is an opportunity to improve their health outcomes through access to pharmaceutical goods that they've previously been excluded to. These 3 fields of investment, we believe, are a significantly suitable way for Pfizer to spend its excess capital that is meeting its ethical obligations.
As I hope you can see, Pfizer's current balance between research and development and share repurchase spending requires significant reform, but it also provides a great opportunity for Pfizer to embark on the future of its business. We've proposed a 2-phase plan in order to correct this. Firstly, by restructuring the incentives of executives and shareholders, and then secondly, using this money to embark on profitable as well as ethical investment strategies into the future. We believe that these strategies have the capacity to address the ethical obligations that Pfizer owes to its key three stakeholders. Firstly, its shareholders. Secondly, its consumers. And thirdly, its obligation to broader global health outcomes. And importantly, we think that this addresses Pfizer's interests as a company on ethical grounds, as well as its legal and financial interests. We invite you to reflect upon this for a few moments, and then are happy to answer any questions which you might have regarding the presentation or our plan more generally regarding Pfizer into the future.
Thank you. Okay, very good, very good. We will now have questions from the judges.
Yep.
And I just remind you for you to stay in your role as the consultant for Phoenix, and this is the board we represent.
So let me ask you a question. Bernie and Hillary and Liz Warren, they didn't get elected.
No.
Donald got elected. And why would you believe that Donald Trump is going to basically stick the SEC on us? I mean, isn't most of us on the board, supporting Trump because we thought that he would be good for our company, good for business. So in terms of the SEC enforcing 10b-18, why is that? I know that's not the only issue on the table here, but why should we be worried about that?
I think the fact that there's bipartisan support, first and foremost, is quite concerning as we look into the after Trump's determined government, but also...
So we're working really 4 years down the road?
That's one part of it, but also when we look at Trump has recently put together his financial advisory committee with several members such as Larry Fink, as I mentioned, who are really strongly in support and have spoken about this numerous times to the media about his intention to reduce the prevalence of this practice. So I think it is important to, whether or not the laws are changed, it doesn't change the fact that this needs to occur, but I think overall it is a likely.
Well, I mean, every other day we get mixed messages. That ship was supposedly headed to Korea, but now it was headed in the opposite direction, close to your neck of the woods. I mean, how can we make decisions based upon a political administration that is unstable?
Could I build on that? I think it's important to note that firstly, Pfizer should be acting in order to protect all of its bases legally, and we've outlined that even at the moment, it's still exposed to class action lawsuits, and therefore there's a significant financial risk and also reputational risk when it comes to Pfizer in dealing with this. In terms of Trump more specifically, I think firstly noting that Larry Fink, a key financial advisor, has been outspoken regarding share repurchases, suggests that he would be inclined to at least change the enforcement of that to some extent, but also Trump, as the nature of his political movement, does respond quite actively to the interests of the public. And as we've noted, there is a very large movement growing on both conservative sides of politics as well as more progressive sides against share repurchases. And with, in terms of framing Trump's message as a whole, which is giving power back to people, I think that Pfizer does need to reflect on the implications that this could have regarding the interests of shareholders as well as the interests of the public in ensuring that executives are acting in the interests of the people.
It's interesting that the president claims that he's his own policy advisor. I have another question for you, though. Why have you not recommended merger to us? Because you mentioned other companies being more progressive in terms of their R&D. Instead of, because we haven't really talked about what this is going to cost us. How much money are we prepared to put into R&D? What's our pipeline? What's our expected return on investment? Because we could get into the geriatric drug market, and what is it, 1 out of every 100 drugs you start in the pipeline actually makes it to FDA approval? Why aren't we merging with some other company that fits this better to optimize the share value and return on investment?
So firstly, in terms of merging with other companies, Pfizer recently tried to merge with the company Allergen, and that was failed. That was closed down by the government, and so we were reluctant to look at other acquisitions in light of those recent changes to Pfizer's intentions in the future. Also, just in the pharmaceutical industry in general, mergers are generally detrimental to the industry as a whole as they reduce competition. So it's a slightly dubious from an ethical point of view to encourage the merging of many companies, as it just reduces research and development from all of like those angles that could potentially unfold, and also competition, as I said. In terms of the output from research and development expenditure, we've looked at looking at these investment portfolios. We've looked at these from 3 angles because we are aware of the risky nature of the industry, and we're hoping that by looking at like product innovation, for example, we're able to reduce the risk in the industry, and we don't think this is something that Pfizer is currently looking at. It needs to go against the status quo, as we could say, and look at things such as genomics, as we said, that will ultimately make the product of pharmaceuticals more efficient with less failure rates, which are the driving cost of pharmaceutical costs at the moment.
I'd also build on that and say, we're not saying that mergers shouldn't be something that Pfizer should pursue. They're currently looking at lots of mergers, and we think that that's a viable strategy to go down. But in terms of us as an external consulting group, we think alerting Pfizer, especially the board of directors, to opportunities which are currently being ignored is something which is very important for us to do. Noting with what you had said about the very low success rate of internally developed drugs, specifically the second point on our plan with regarding innovation, innovative focused drug development has the capacity to improve that. And so by improving the odds, by ensuring that we have a better understanding of organs with organ-on-a-chip technology, which models the human body, not only going into research do we have the capacity to understand the likely outcome of those drugs before going into stages 3 and 4, but we also have the capacity to expand the number of trials conducted within a certain budget. So by estimating the impact on the human body, you can do more and more iterations of those drug tests. And we think this is something that Pfizer should definitely get on board. And in order to do that, we think that they should redirect more money into this investment opportunity, because at the moment we think Pfizer needs to expand its pipeline significantly, and this is a way which is relatively low risk and has the capacity to increase the output of Pfizer's research and development portfolio at the moment.
And just finally, the reason that we haven't specified exact amounts of expenditure to direct to each of these projects is because of the innovative nature of them, such that it's really difficult to know exactly how much each of them will cost. And so what we've gone by is what other companies, the market competitors of Pfizer, have currently spent on them, and we're using that as a foundation. But also, due to the nature of our phase 1 and 2 changes to Pfizer's corporate structure, for example, and corporate incentives, it's a very organic process in which we're not specifying like a certain amount of money to be redirected away from share repurchases towards investment. Rather, we're looking at creating a culture of the long-termism such that it's hard to specify that exact amount. Rather, we foresee it happening with the changes of incentives, as we said.
Did you take a look at shareholder relations, shareholder investment, that organization, or whoever it is within our company that drives the decision to repurchase, and kind of have the conversation or make the comparison between what they're doing in terms of share reinvesting and R&D to see if there is some way we can incentivize our R&D or shareholder relations, just the top level of management within the company, to redirect. It sounds like the company is only looking at increasing shareholder value through the repurchase. And I wonder if we can also increase our shareholder value if we are aggressively doing research and development and pumping out new products and and increasing our value that way too.
I definitely agree with you on that. By investing in opportunities which are profitable into the future and have very strong likelihoods of bolstering the profits into the future, that naturally raises the share price because the expectations of the share market is that the value of Pfizer will increase into the future. In terms of ensuring that there is a communication between the group within Pfizer which deals with maximizing shareholder value as well as the research and development department, we think that by restructuring executive incentives away from simply focusing on the share price and focusing on other measures would be able to facilitate that discussion between the two groups. And we have faith in the executive of Pfizer at the moment to facilitate that discussion and have a very productive outcome to ensure that shareholder value is maximized not just for shareholders who sell their shares as there's a raised price in the short term, but maximizes shareholder value across the entirety of the shareholder base.
And to follow up on that, don't we sometimes put some of these shares that we have repurchased back into the marketplace?
So sell extra shares through reissues?
Well, let's just say that we buy back 1 million shares. Do we just tear up those stock certificates, or do we at some point in time, if we need to raise money, capital funds, whatever, we can sell those shares back to the marketplace?
In terms of the price to earnings ratio, which determines the capacity to reissue new shares and therefore raise capital in that form, Pfizer at the moment and before embarking on share repurchases actually had a price to earnings ratio above that of the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, which means that they would be able to issue new shares and gain new capital to facilitate new investments. So
maybe I'm not making my question clear. My question is, when we repurchase these shares, what happens? Do they just disappear?
Effectively, that is what happens. So the total number of shares outstanding is decreased. And so effectively the number of chunks within the pie decreases, but the size of the pie as a whole doesn't change. And Pfizer is free to cut it up even more, but that would be a decision based on what the executives saw best fit.
But usually when we're incorporated, under our articles of incorporation, we have a right to issue so many shares of stock. So even though we have repurchased those, if we need to raise capital funds for our R&D or whatever, we can reissue. So you're calling them new shares. I'm looking at them as shares that.
Yes, that's one option.
I have no questions. I think you explained it quite well. I was interested in the shareholder value being increased by mergers and acquisitions, since our R&D has dipped so much in the last several years. But I think we've done this for a purpose. We've been buying back our shares in order to give our company more strength so that we can be on the prowl for the perfect company to buy, to oversight. So that's my perspective, but I think you answered all the questions that I had after you asked yours. You had similar questions.
Okay.
Let me ask another question, because in an earlier presentation, we dealt with one of the pharma companies that dealt mainly with orphan drugs.
Yep.
And if we are reducing our number of shares, I'm sorry, not number of shares, if we are reducing our level of R&D, does that have a subsequent impact on grants and other things that we could possibly acquire to help us to expand? Because I'm wondering if we're hurting ourselves by saying that we're reducing, I think you said in a 3-year period, we reduced from 9 to 6 $1 billion, and I'm thinking that for all those other research organizations that give money to do research to come up with these things, wouldn't they be taking a look at whether we are actually seriously committed to developing what our new drugs?
So in terms of orphan diseases, there is a current grant existing to research into rare diseases and create treatments for that. There's one potential area of investment that Pfizer could look into. But apart from that, with the termination of President Obama's presidency, we don't foresee any more grants arising in the near future to build on, and such that spending more money on research and development for the purpose of getting grants doesn't quite line up. Whereas spending more money on research and development to make up for the lack of funding around pharmaceutical developments, as we're seeing in the future, does make a lot more sense.
I think being on the front foot of innovation would also put Pfizer in a key position to capture more grants. Research organisations, when looking specifically with orphan drugs, so diseases which haven't yet had a viable treatment, they need to have a really out-of-the-box approach, because the current techniques trying to solve them simply aren't working. And when you do show as a company, as we hope you will decide to do, that Pfizer is willing to embark on different technologies, geoprotractors, for example, that would provide an edge when compared to the competition, specifically within pitches, to get those research grants and to also ensure that Pfizer and its consumers could benefit from the outcomes of those research grants.
Any further questions? No? Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Just some feedback. You were very professional. It shows that you have studied your subject very well. Sort of way over my head, but I played the role of a board member and trying to stay with you. But I think you did a very good job of presenting the information, and your solutions were very good, and it's an interesting topic. I was a little scared there at one point when we started down the political road. I'm like, but I think you handled it well. And when your first question went that way, I'm like, oh, here we go. You know, I think you all handled it very well.
Thank you.
I mean, I have to say, if you looked at my notes, you're going to see lots of cross-outs, because every time you said something that I thought was, and I wrote down a question, the interesting thing was that almost all my questions then got answered during the main presentation, and the ones that weren't answered, when I pushed you, I got the answers in the Q&A session. So that was really, really impressive. I have to say, when you get into stuff involving politics and Donald Trump, you know, what was so striking to me that I wrote down is, this is extraordinary. First of all, it's so interesting to see a perspective coming from people who do not live in the United States as to what's happening here. You know, some of which I think was right on the money, and other parts of it I have to say I disagree with. You know, but I thought it was fascinating that you took it on, and you took on Rule 10B of the Securities and Exchange Act. So I guess that means that you're all qualified to go to American law school. Because that's tricky stuff. 2 words that I circled that were so powerful to me in different ways that I hope you capitalize on tomorrow. Speculation. You say the word speculation, it goes right to the heart of an ethical issue.
Yep.
So tomorrow, when you're doing your ethical issue and you have all of 10 minutes, and particularly in your 90-second, you need to hit that.
Yep.
Is this speculation? Are we rewarding speculators as opposed to long-term investors for the benefit of the company? Because I'll tell you, it took a while for that to kind of emerge because the subject matter is complicated, but it's right there, and you should be nailing that in the first 30 seconds out. And there was one point where you said, you referred to us as being greedy. Never tell a board that it's greedy, because you'll get fired 3 seconds later and you'll never get to get your message across. Okay, so are those investors who are buying and flipping, are they greedy? It's different than us being greedy as an entity.
Yep.
I think the topic starts out looking relatively straightforward, but it's not. I would put this on the higher end of difficulty here. I was wondering why you chose to talk about the American company as opposed to an Australian company or an Australian subsidiary.
Pfizer is unique in that it does spend so much money on share repurchases, more so than any other pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, so we sort of looked at
Yeah.
share repurchases as an issue first, because obviously it did have ethical components of it, and then Adeline obviously is quite well versed on the medical, biomed background, and so seeing Pfizer as a company which had a significant use of share repurchases as well as the pharmaceutical component, I think.
It's really a meeting of our passions through my interest in reforming the pharmaceutical industry and Manning's interest in economics, and again, Hugh's interest in French. No, in law and politics, and the contextualization of this issue. Yeah, it's just a really a standout meeting of our passions.
Now, some of our finance texts who are not here probably would have pushed you more on the quantitative, on the numbers.
Yep.
Okay, you addressed it because it was really a global package that you were presenting to us. So I thought the numbers, the specifics of the numbers didn't become as important as the principle that was driving you. I think there were other people who judged the competition who could have really, pushed on that more.
Sure, definitely.
You did really well.
Yeah, I would make one other suggestion. As Your Honor said, you need to really focus that 10 minutes goes really fast. And really have your highlight points ready to hit them quick. And one of the things that, from a personal standpoint and previous involvement in corporate America, it's always good when you can show you're offering a solution, and you offer the solution, what you're going to look at and measure in terms of what that solution does, and then the subsequent actions you're going to take as a result of the things you get from that measurement. It's a cycle that you establish a recommendation, you're going to measure something, once you measure it, what are going to be your outcomes, and go back to that. That's all that I have. Anyone else with any other questions? Otherwise, we think you guys did fabulous, and we wish you very well.
Congratulations.
Points too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just in your presentation, try not to, if you're on that end, I couldn't read the slides on
Sure.
and so it was hard to read all of them.
Sorry about that.
Some of your slides are way too wordy.
Okay.
You have too many words in them.
Yeah.
I think 2 slides, if you want to flip over to the one that says, it's the, let's see, Pfizer problem.
Earlier on.
Yeah.
I think you said Pfizer R. And I think it should be, in U.S., we consider a corporation a body.
Oh, okay, so it's single.
Yeah, but they're in Australian English, so it might be correct. It might be correct in their syntax.
No, Pfizer is. I think it should be. Pfizer is currently overutilizing share repurchases.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Pfizer is currently overutilizing.
Yeah, but we have to be country sensitive because if you're English.
No, they don't.
Is it correct or incorrect? You're an Australian, so.
It reads correctly from my perspective, but
From your
double
syntax.
check.
Can we use a singular?
Well, because it's an
Subject?
entity, it's sort of a.
But it's.
I know.
It's still a singular.
But remember, it's not American English, so,
I don't know.
you know. Is it-
We'll check over to the
Check it out,
and
with whoever you're working with.
Well, you created some of an ethical dilemma between the judges.
But there were a couple of those that I
Yeah,
saw.
sure.
So check your grammar on a couple of them. And just, gosh, I don't know if you redo your slides or not, but that's a lot of reading.
Slides tomorrow.
There are no
slides tomorrow.
That's a lot.
But for future presentations, we will take
Definitely will take on.
And you kind of zip through it really fast, and I mean, I took a lot of notes here from the information.
Yeah, we found it difficult to put on with content.
Yeah,
So
it's
that,
hard, yes.
and also, if you can lose the notes. I think it's better not to use notes if possible.
You are permitted to have them, you can't read. There was a lot of reference back and forth to them under the questions that were asked.
Yeah.
didn't break the rules, you didn't read, okay, because we know what reading is.
Yeah.
But, you know, in this competition, many
Right.
teams use no notes
Right.
at all. Or they look once, they look once or twice as opposed to repeatedly.
Yeah, yeah. And or if you want to stand back like you
Yeah.
are now
Okay.
and refer to points on your slide.
Yeah.
And you know, when you refer, because the engineering ethics that I teach is also a communication course. And the students have to demonstrate good public speaking skills. They have to all do PowerPoint presentations on the ethical issues that they've chosen in engineering, science, technology. So I'm kind of giving you some background of what I teach. So the best thing is instead of having notes in your hand like that, your notes are in your slide. Okay?
Yeah.
And you can refer to them up there, but you don't read your slides. You can just glance at them, and then that should remind you of the points you're trying to say. Okay? Just some polishing things here I wanted to do. All right?
Another
Thank you.
judge pointed out that you were actually on the right side, the correct side of the screen, because another team was on this side, and they said that was not good, that because people read this way, so you should always be on the left. In that room, there was no choice. There was some other apparatus on that side, but you were actually on the correct side.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Very
Thank you for your
good.
feedback.
Really appreciate it.
Very good, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.